Again, really glad you're here. For those of you joining online, thanks for being a part of the day wherever you are joining from. And again, excited to jump into the scriptures and allow Jesus to do what he does, use his scriptures to transform us and continue to shape us into more and more of his likeness. And it's always important. It's important now. Obviously, we live in a world, we live in a time period that is full of fractures and ruptures. There are all sorts of fault lines quaking inside of relationships and institutions and enterprises, whether that be something as small and micro as just family. Our families have new levels of tension we've never had before, never experienced before. We have just cultural trends and moments, and there's so much that feels vulnerable to these fractures and ruptures. And they oftentimes seem to come now just as a part of life. It's almost like driving down the road and you just are going about your business, and you've probably experienced this. You're just going about your business, driving down the road, and in 1 millisecond, your day changes because one pebble flying like an earth-shattering projectile hits your windshield, and everything changes in the moment, right? It's one crack, and it might splinter, and there's just this fracture, and you suddenly get acquainted with your insurance policy again. You suddenly get acquainted with who can replace windshields in your driveway, right? It's just one moment, just one moment. And it feels like that a little bit for us right now. In one moment, something that felt clear before and perfectly usable before can fracture. We've had these slow leaks culturally, really probably for a couple of decades, and we didn't notice them at first. Almost like a very slow leak in a gas line. We were just very confidence in one another. Kindness, civility, hope. Those little leaks give way to ruptures and massive explosions, much like there is a gas leak, and all of a sudden everything changes in a moment. It feels like, what just happened? Well, all the while, there has been this gradual leak. The time that we find ourselves living in is not a moment that has come out of nowhere. We are living in a time period that has been building in some ways for decades. Now we're here and we wonder, okay, what do we do with it? How is it in the world of fractures where families who never thought they would disagree with each other, never thought they would lose a relationship, are now not talking to each other, not gathering, and have historically been family traditions. What do we do when things are rupturing and exploding that we always thought were going to be dependable and reliable? How do we, in the middle of all that, live like Jesus and in his power, in his strength, as people who would stand firm and acknowledge there is a truth? And it is not an idea, it is a person. There is a truth, and his name is Jesus. And how do we stand firm with Jesus? And at the same time, if Jesus is love, how do we love well? How do we do both? How do we do both? Because it's not easy. It's not easy. How is it that we stand firm and love well in order to continue to be encouraged and nudged and motivated, and even at times more? I want to invite you back to the book of Daniel, which is the Old Testament of your Bible. Daniel chapter 4 is where we're going to be today. And again, Daniel is primarily about a guy named Daniel and some of his friends. It's the events of his life recorded, but it's the events of his life as an exile. Daniel was a Hebrew young man, and the Hebrews, the Israelite people, they had a gradual drift from God that led to a subtle disregard for God. They knew God and had a head nod towards God, but really lived their own way. They said, well, God is God and we worship him, but we really do life our own way. That's a huge warning to us. Over and over throughout the Bible, that's a warning to us.
In fact, one could make a case that many people who are active and present or occupying seats in churches much like ours would in some ways have picked up a disregard from God. I will give God a nod. I will give God an hour or so of my week, but I do live like my own way. I trust my heart more than God's heart. It happens gradually and subtly. It starts with a drift, goes to a disregard, and that disregard for the Israelites eventually gave way for an out-and-out disdain. They just wanted nothing to do with God. The rest of the world looked more attractive. Other nations looked more attractive. Worshipping other experiences became more attractive. And so God has to take his hand of blessing off of this. I mean, I can't bless that. Not only can I not bless that, you've really got outside of my hand of protection. You've gotten where I can't protect you. And because I love you so much, I've got to do something to get your attention back. I've created you to be with me, and so I want to get your attention back. And that's where the Babylonians come in. And Babylonians at this time were led by King Nebuchadnezzar, and they sweep in and they just rout Israelites. They just destroy them. They tear things down, they knock things over, they burn things, they kill people, they steal everything that's of value, including things from the temple of God. And they capture some of what they think are the highest potential people. Young men like Daniel. They bring them back to Babylon and they begin to just indoctrinate them in their ways and their culture. And yet Daniel is this example over and over and over again of how to be a person in a land you didn't want, with a leader you didn't want, and certainly a leader you didn't choose. And at the same time, stand firm and love well. Stand firm and love well. When your life is on the line, how to stand firm and love well. When your conveniences are gone, how to stand firm and love well. Daniel does it repeatedly. Today we're going to jump into Daniel chapter 4, and here's a little bit the reality. These are actually words initially from King Nebuchadnezzar. These are words that King Nebuchadnezzar sent out to his people. He just had a couple of moments where the God of Daniel, our God, would amaze him. Now, he wouldn't really give full devotion to God. He would try to add God to his list of other gods. And yet here he's sending out a note to the nation, really acknowledging Daniel's God is at least great, and is at least strong, and is at least powerful, and is at least mighty. But Nebuchadnezzar, as happens a couple times, he finds himself in a little bit of a predicament, and that he has had a dream that he doesn't understand. And so he's asked all of his people to come and try and interpret the dream. None of them can. And so now he's going to go get Daniel. Because Daniel before has shown himself able to actually tell the king his dreams and interpret them. So he's like, well, I'm going to have to go back to this Jewish guy again. I didn't really think we had him fully indoctrinated yet, but he's done this before. So I'm going to go back to him. That's where we're going to pick it up in verse 9, because that's where things get really interesting. I said Belteshazzar. Now he's referring to Daniel there. Again, when they brought the Hebrew young men to Babylon, they changed their names as an attempt to change their identity and change their point of reference to their God. Daniel's name became Belteshazzar. I, Belteshazzar, he says, I know that the spirit of the knowing gods is in you, and no mystery is to envelop you. For here's my dream, and I want you to interpret it for me. These are the visions I saw while lying in my bed, and I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, which I think is vibrant green, not red and orange and brown. Its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the wild animals found shelter, and the birds lived in its branches. From it, every creature was fed. This is a significant, long, noticeable tree. Verse 13, in the visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, like a messenger coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from the branches, but let the stump and its roots bound with iron and bronze remain in the ground and the grass of the field. Let him be drenched to dew of heaven, and let him live with wild animals.
Let him be given the mind of an animal till 7 times or 7 years pass by him. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms of the earth and gives to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest of people. This is the dream that I had. I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now Belteshazzar or Daniel, tell me, what does it mean? For none of these wise men, none of these astrologers, none of these trained musicians, none of these trained dream readers can tell me what it means. Daniel, I'm counting on you. Tell me what it means. I know you can do it because the spirit of these holy gods is in you. Verse 19. Then Daniel, again, also called Belteshazzar, he's given this Babylonian name, was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. If we went way back, the dream initially terrified the king, and now Daniel hears it, and Daniel's a little unnerved by it all. And the king could read it on his face somehow, and so he says, Belteshazzar, Daniel, don't let the dream or its meaning alarm you. So Daniel answered, my Lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries. But the tree that you saw, well, king, you're that tree. You're the tree. King, you're really tall, and you are high, and you are mighty, and you have built a kingdom that provides a great amount of food and shelter to people. And to many people in your kingdom, you seem beyond accessible. You seem as high as the sky. And you have found great pride in that. You have found great strength in what it is you have built. But King, you're the tree. Because your pride is in you and what you have built, God is warning you that He is going to remove you from power. He is going to cut you down. Now the stump will remain. There will be a chance for you to be restored. There will be a chance for something in you to be renewed. But King, what the dream really means is that you are going to become like a wild animal, and you will live in the wilderness for 7 years, and you will eat the grass like an ox. You are going to actually lose your mind. You're going to become insane because your pride is too great. Now, let me just jump ahead for you a little bit. It actually happens. That's actually what happens. Months go by, and it's like Nebuchadnezzar reins it in for a little while. And then one day he's walking out, and he can oversee some of the land, and he says, man, look at what a great thing I've built. Look at what a great business. Look what a great family. Look what a great house in this community. Look what a great reputation I have built. And he loses it to his pride again, and in the moment, he loses his mind. And into the wilderness he goes. He does begin to eat like an ox, like just a wild animal. And he lives that way for 7 years. 7 years. And Daniel's the guy who has to give him the news. Daniel's the guy that's got to tell the king like that. And I just want to remind you in the moment that this is a king who with just a snap of a fingers, blink of an eye, nod of a head, could have your head cut off. Daniel's got to tell him the news. This isn't Daniel getting to be like, I've wanted to tell you this for a long time. That's not what's happening here. But actually what we could see from Daniel is not that he interpreted the dream, but we could actually see from Daniel how in a moment where it does feel now like for the king, everything is fracturing, everything is rupturing. And Daniel's a guy who has lived with constant fracture and constant rupture and explosion. What we actually get to see is at least a model, one way that we could possibly, like Daniel did, be people who could speak the truth in love. Who could speak the truth in love. who in a time of division and hostility and lack of civility and instant attack and ridicule, how we could go against the grain and speak the truth in love. This isn't like Daniel only, right? Jesus models this. Jesus talks about it in ways. There's a guy named Paul who writes a lot in the New Testament who actually used the phrase, speak the truth, but please do it in love. Speak the truth, but when you speak the truth, let it be wrapped up like in a cocoon of love. And Daniel, who has every reason to only speak the truth with no love, speaks the truth in love. This is one of those realities I don't have to convince any of you of. The world could use a little more truth and love. We don't just need more truth. We don't just need a return to truth. We need a return to truth and love. If you're here today or joining online and you are a follower of Jesus and you call yourself part of his church, this is for us. This is for us. We have to go first here. We can't sit around waiting for people who don't yet know or don't want anything to do with Jesus. This is a Jesus-shaped way of living. We have to go first. We have to go first. So how does Daniel do it, though? I mean, you see it. He's terrified and he's nervous and he kind of plays out the facts. And what does he really do? Well, let me just give you a few things that Daniel, these aren't exhaustive. These aren't the only ways, but this is part of what we see from Daniel is that first, he makes this effort to seek to understand. To seek to understand. Daniel's in turmoil and Daniel's perplexed and Daniel's a little terrified and because he's trying to understand the king. Do you remember when he said, man, I wish this was about your adversaries. I wish this was about your adversaries. This is a guy who Daniel, we would say, had every right to just come unhinged on. And he's like, man, I really wish this was about your adversaries. Daniel's in a position where he's like, hey, maybe if this is really about the king, maybe this means I'll go free. Maybe this means everything changes for us. And what he say? Man, I wish this was about your adversaries. I wish this was about somebody else. He's trying to understand. Like, man, what is this really going to mean for him? What is it really going to be like? What's it really going to be like for this king to lose his mind for 7 years? What's that really going to be like? I wonder if Daniel went so far as to think, what's that going to be like for the people around the king? What's that going to be like for the people closest to him, people who maybe love this king, people who... What's that going to be like? What's it going to be like for the king who has had everything to live in the wilderness and to live like a wild... There's this attempt to understand. There's this attempt to understand. And we just happen to live in a world, we happen to live in a period of time where there's very little value on seeking to understand, and there's a disproportionate amount of value on trying to be understood. Jesus had this way of always seeming to be able to understand the people he was with. It's why he would go to where they are. It's why he would get accused of being in wrong places, but actually be in the exact right place with the exactly right people. Why? Because he was trying to understand. He's trying to understand. And it's really hard to understand in a world of sound bites and clips. That's really hard. You can't really understand anybody on one sentence, right? You just can't. You can't understand anybody on one sentence. Daniel's got one dream and a few years of living in the orbit of King Nebuchadnezzar, and he's still trying to okay, what am I going to understand in this moment? Let me just ask you, in a world where things have become fractured and where you have probably experienced new relational tensions and where maybe you have experienced significant relational loss in a handful of years and maybe you just experienced some of the and the yuck of what we're living in, are you seeking to understand? When you hear what you don't like, when you hear what you don't agree with, are you seeking to understand? Why does that person or why does that group think the way they think? Why are they responding the way they're responding? Why are they moving the way they're moving? Are we seeking to understand? Are we trying to learn a story? Are we seeking to understand? Are we trying to hear the heart behind the words? Are we trying to hear the thought behind a word? Are we trying to hear a tone behind the word? Are we willing to seek to understand, to potentially hear the desperation behind a word, or the fear behind a word, or the anger behind a word? To seek to understand. Part of what helps us to seek to understand is this next reality of just trying to say, well, like while I'm trying to understand, I'm gonna do my very best to see God's image. I'm gonna try and do my very best to see God's image. And whoever it is that's that's disagreeing with me, part of this pause in Daniel is Daniel has such devotion to God. Like Daniel is, like again, he's always willing to sacrifice and he's always willing to pay this price, but you always see Daniel acting with this sense of respect. I mean, of all the names that Daniel could have called the king, right? Of all the names Daniel could have called the king, he didn't. He didn't. Why? Well, Daniel's got this intimate enough relationship with this powerful enough God that there's something that allows him to see the image of God in people and in places and in friends and in enemies. And because here's the reality, and maybe you know this, but maybe we lose track of it. Every person ever born has been created in the image of God. Your worst enemies are created in the image of God. Not every person ever born has lived out the image of God. Not every person born has ever let the image of God be revealed through them, but every person is born with the image of God in them. That's why the writer of Ecclesiastes says there's eternity tucked in our heart. Like there's this homing device that knows, man, we are created for something more. What is that? Well, it's eternity. It's with the God who made us. And can we just be honest? Isn't it sometimes just easier to say, and not just say, but to think, man, they're crazy. Man, that's just pure evil. Isn't it just easier to do that? When the reality actually is, it might be evil and they might be crazy, but they are still made in the image of God. In fact, they're still a person God is in great pursuit of. They're still a person that God is in great pursuit of. We're in it, right? I don't know. I don't do very good keeping track of like numbers of days, but we're a very few numbers of day away from an election, right? Okay, and I just wonder. You probably have somebody that you've decided to vote for, but I just wonder, what would it be like if one-on-one you could sit down with both of our primary presidential candidates, one-on-one, one at a time? You and one candidate, and then you and another. And what would it look like if you could then add like 4 or 5 of their closest confidants who you don't really want to hear from, and you don't really like what they're saying, and you don't really like what they're doing? What would happen if you could sit down with that group of 4 or 5 people and seek to understand and fight to see the image of God in them? What would that be like? What would that be like? I think for lots of us, it'd be almost unimaginably hard. What would it be like to sit down with them one-on-one and just seek to understand who they are and seek to understand their life, and then to fight like crazy to see the image of God in them? We happen to live in a time that's so divided that the attempt is to get whoever you are going to vote for, their attempt is to get you to see the other person is evil incarnate, as far from God as you could possibly get. Not right. But what if you defied the odds? What if we defied the odds and said, you know what? I do not like that policy. I do not like that plan. I probably would not be friends with that person, but somewhere in there is the image of God. Now, there's a couple of groups of you in the room right now, and some of you, like, you're awkward, and you're like, please don't let him look at me, please don't let him look at me, please don't let, and it's fine, okay? There's another part of you, like, I'm never going to, like, sit with somebody who's, like, running for president. And right, most of us are not ever going to sit with people who are running for president, right? I get that. So let's shrink it down. What if you could sit across the table from the person that you have blocked on social media because you're convinced they're advocating something that's going to destroy the world? What would happen if you could sit down face to face with the person at work who always seems to be the one, like, stirring up trouble? If there's not drama, they feel like they haven't had a good day. What if you could sit down across the table with the person that has bullied your kid at school or is bullying you? And what if part of standing firm, not compromising, not giving in, but what if part of standing firm and loving well was sitting down and seeking to understand and fighting like crazy to see the image of God in them? What if the image of God in somebody altered how we spoke to somebody? What if when we spoke, we just lived with the reminder that while they may be spreading evil, and while they may be the worst person you will ever encounter in your life, they're created in the image of a God who is still crazy in love with them and is in desperate pursuit of them? How might it help us speak the truth in love? It reminds me a little bit of Jesus, who, when dying the most agonizing death on a cross, could look at the people killing him and mocking him and say, man, Father, please forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They're clearly not living out your image right now, Father, but please forgive them. They're even unaware that your image is even in them. They're unaware that you've actually made them. We can speak the truth in love, friends, and it takes a little bit of seeking and understanding, and it takes a little bit of seeing the image of God in somebody and then sensing God's timing. Like, what would it look like just to sense God's timing? Again, we live in a world that is bent on getting you to react, to not respond. I mean, the world, people make millions of dollars off of getting you to react out of anger, out of frustration, out of fear. Okay, the people you listen to on the news make millions and millions of dollars a year getting you to react. They are experts at it. And when we react, we lose any sense of what God's timing in the moment could be. Here, Daniel, like, there's this, he's perplexed, and he's got some fears in it, and there's this pause, like there's this delay. Again, there could have been this is the moment I've been waiting for, now, King, here's what the truth, but no, there's this pause. Like, there's this wait, like there's this gather himself, like there's this moment where he starts to gather the tone and gather the thought, and how can I say this? How do I want to say this? How do I want to convey some compassion? And it's really a really beautiful and potent pause, even though it's probably only a handful of seconds. But what about God's timing? Everything we see and everything we hear is not worthy of an instantaneous response. Okay? Everything we see and everything we hear is not worthy of an instantaneous response. And you're like, oh man, I don't ever post anything. I don't ever share anything. Okay, that's great. Me either. But can I tell you what? We got to go one more level. It's not even worth an instantaneous internal response. right? It's not even worth an instant or internal response. It's not worth an instantaneous flight to anger. It's not worth an instantaneous flight to fear. It's not worth an instantaneous flight to paranoia. It's not worth that. Because when we get there, then even in our own hearts and even in our own minds, or maybe in a close little circle of people who all think like us, we are trying to just declare what we think is the truth, and we're speaking out of that anger or that frustration, or even sometimes as much as that rage. And we're like, but how do we pull that back and say, yeah, but what if there is a truth to be spoken here? What is God's timing, and how will I do it in love? How will I do it aware that the person I'm going to speak to or the group of people I'm going to speak to are created in the image of God? And God has made them with great purpose. They may never acknowledge it. They may never see it. But they do have the image of God. What would that look like? Now, we talked about all sorts of things, and because of the season we're in and the divisiveness we're in and how political it often seems, I've pointed to a lot of examples in that, but let's just talk a little bit more like, what about just you? Like, where do you need to speak the truth in love from somebody? Or maybe where is somebody trying to speak the truth in love to you? Where are you on the receiving end of it? Where are you on the receiving end of somebody who loves you enough to speak the truth? My life is different because people have been willing to speak the truth in love to me at times. When Eric and I were first married, one of my primary investors in my life, still a significant investor in my life, named Dennis, he was on the other end of a phone line when Eric and I were first married and living in New York, and he just said to me, truthfully and lovingly, John, you have to take a day off. You deserve that. Your wife deserves that. Your marriage deserves that. No more 7 days. No more. And he's a really direct person, but it came with all this love. It came out of his belief in me and us and who God had made us to be and how he had made us to experience life and live out his mission. John, you have to take a day off. It was the truth. And it came with love. I remember one time, a lot of years ago, I was sitting down with somebody who had essentially like a supervisory role over me in a role I had at that time, and we were talking about some things in the future and some dreams, and I'll never forget, he's the gentlest human I know, and I'll never forget at this lunch, him putting his fork down and almost gathering himself, and then looking at me and saying, John, I love the dreams you're talking about, and I'm for you. I'm in your corner. It's one of his favorite phrases. I'm in your corner on all those dreams. And then again, this gentle person mustering the strength to look at me and say, but John, you have got to stop waiting for everything to be perfect before you make a move. You have got to stop waiting for everything to be perfect before you make a move. Because I was going to miss tons of what I was supposed to experience and what I was supposed to do to live with Jesus and his mission, waiting for things to be perfect. That conversation changed the course of my life. Because somebody who is so gentle and doesn't want to do a hard, mustered the courage to speak the truth in love. Just a couple weeks ago, maybe 10 days ago or so, Pastor Joel, who's at our Middleville location today, he came to me, and he just said, hey, I need to ask you about something. He said, I've heard you in a couple of environments. I've heard you say something with this tone, and he explained a tone he was hearing from me around a certain topic. And he said, I don't think that's the tone you're trying to convey or that you want to convey. And I don't think it's the tone we want to carry. And he said, I might be misinterpreting the tone. He said, but I just... And now Joel and I have a great relationship. he knows there's no risk that, like, he says that and I'm going to fire him and 30 seconds later, right? But there's always a little bit of risk in that conversation. But he ventures the risk, and he leaves me all this space to process it. I say, you know what? I hear that. I just need to, I need to listen to the Lord a little bit to see where that's at, to see how that lands with me. He's like, yeah, great. And you know what? He was right. I sat with it for a little bit, listened to the Lord a little bit, and Joel was right. I was talking about one topic, one thing with this tone, and it wasn't the tone I wanted. And I wasn't even fully seeing it in myself. And because he had the willingness and the courage to come and speak the truth in love, he probably saved me so much heartache down the road. Probably saved me so much heartache down the road. Probably saved me from causing so much unintentional pain to people close to me that I would never have wanted to cause. My life has at times been safeguarded by people speaking the truth in love. My life at times has been allowed to take a more accurate trajectory because people have been willing to speak the truth in love. And we say the truth in love because we know it's hard. We know it's difficult. We know it's challenging. So let me just tell you the results real quick. What might the results of that be? Let me just read this quickly to you at the end of the passage. We're going to jump down to verse 28, and here's the results in the passage and the story. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, there he was. He's walking on the roof, and he says, "Isn't this not the great Babylon that I have built as a royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" And even as his words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven and said, "This is what was decreed for you, king. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people, and you will live with wild animals. You will eat grass like an ox, and 7 years will pass before you acknowledge that the Most High is actually the sovereign God over all kingdoms." Verse 33, immediately what had been said about the king Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from the people. He even grew like feathers that looked like an eagle and claws that looked like an animal's. It happened. He experienced really tangible, undeniable, unmissable results. But we often don't. So what are the results when we speak the truth in love? Let me give you a few. The results in other people. One is nothing. Nothing. Sometimes they do nothing with it. Welcome to parenting. Future parents, this is one for you, okay? Nothing. Nothing. Adult children of aging parents, this is one for you. Nothing. Spoke the truth in love and nothing happened, right? We feel that pain, yes? I mean, right? Sometimes it's rejecting you. Sometimes it's rejecting you. You don't get to determine other people's responses, and speaking the truth in love doesn't always result in a turn. Jesus said that more living people will reject me than will accept me. He speaks the truth in love. He comes with truth and love, and most people will reject Jesus. It might go even a little more. You might experience attacking. You might be attacked. You might be labeled. Your relationships might be changed and fractured. Again, speaking the truth in love got Jesus crucified. It's not a magic pill. May not change anybody's mind, but there might be repentance. There might be a turning. There might be small change. Maybe there's big change. And maybe for years you live the truth in love, and periodically you speak the truth in love. And over the course of time, maybe change happens. Maybe people change. But how about for us? What happens inside of us? Well, when we speak the truth in love, we are growing and standing firm and loving well. It is part of growing firm and standing firm and loving well. See, we're a little out of balance as a culture. We tend to lean towards either I will stand firm, I will fight for truth, and that's it, or I will love well, and that means there actually is no truth because everybody gets to have a truth, and my loving them is letting them have a truth. We tend to have chosen one of those. It's not the model of Jesus. It wasn't the model of Daniel. To speak the truth in love. And we grow in standing firm and loving well. It's like when you get a new car and it's great, but you learn the car a little bit, right? You learn how fast does this take off? How fast do these brakes work? How hard do I have to push on the pedal? Where are all the buttons? You get into it. You grow in the comfort of it. It's like putting on new shoes, and they're great, but a lot of shoes aren't comfortable the first day, right? It takes a little bit. But man, after 3 or 4 wears, they're just made for you, right? It's like as a kid, man, there was nothing better than having a new baseball glove and getting to break it in, getting to shape it, getting to soften it so that it just became like it was part of your hand. That's this for us. Let's grow in that. You can't control other people's responses. We can live like Jesus, and when we live like Jesus, Jesus-like qualities will continue to grow and expand in us. If we practice speaking the truth in love over the course of the next 3 years from now, we will be people better equipped and more naturally standing firm and loving well, regardless of what comes. So let me ask you a couple questions. Here's the first one. Where do you, right now, where in your life do you need to speak the truth in love? Where do you need to speak the truth in love? Where's your voice needed? What relationship is it needed in? What context is it needed in? Not trying to argue and convincing somebody, just speaking the truth in love. Where is that? Where do you need it? What does that look like? And is there any place you need to receive it? Is there anybody trying to speak the truth in love to you that you're rejecting? You might even be doing it with very Christian verbiage. You might even be saying, oh, let me pray about that. You're not praying about that. You're going home and tearing that person apart in your head. Huh? Where maybe is somebody trying to speak the truth in love to you because they really do love you? It's time to hear it. It's time to hear it. Where is that? Where do you need to speak the truth in love? Where do you need to receive the truth in love?